I want to start with Ruthless Robbie Lawler. Absolute legend, former UFC champion, former Strikeforce fighter as well, will be fighting in his last UFC fight in his next bout against Niko Price. I want to know, is Niko Price the fair opponent in your eyes for Robbie Lawler in his retirement fight with the UFC? I don't know if Robbie Lawler is going to be hanging up combat sports forever, and I know he's a little long in the tooth. I know he's an older fighter. I know he's in his 40s, but look what Matt Brown just did. Will Robbie Lawler be able to do what Matt Brown did to Court McGee to a Niko Price? I don't know. Let's get into it. I mean, I don't think it's the worst matchup. I don't think it's the worst pick by the UFC matchmakers for a retirement fight. Niko Price is not a top-tier guy by any means. Like, hell, I would say even at the peak in his career, he was barely even knocking at the door for to that title or that tier at all. However, as we saw even with the last fight that Niko Price was in, he is a dog. He's not a top-tier guy by any means. He never was, but he's a dog. He is tough, and he's a brawling vet. Those are all things that Ruthless Robbie Lawler still is. Now, I know his last outing against Bryan Barberena, not even close to the Robbie Lawler that we have been used to throughout his entire career. But again, Father Time beats everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Ultimately, I do not think that Niko Price is a bad matchup, a bad pick for Robbie Lawler's retirement fight, because it's probably going to be an entertaining fight. I doubt it will be as one-sided as both of these participants' last fights, Niko Price and Robbie Lawler, respectively. Now, Niko Price, if memory serves me correct, and we'll get into the running them down here in a second, wasn't finished. However, Robbie Lawler finished in his last fight. Let's take a look at Robbie Lawler and Niko Price here, but just paying respects to the legend that is Robbie Lawler, the former UFC champion. 29-16 and oh, but don't let those 16 losses fool you, ladies and gentlemen. He is an absolute legend, and he's been in absolute wars, win or loss. He's got a couple of robberies as well, most notably against Ben Askren, which we'll highlight here as we scroll down. 41 years of age is this absolute legend who is still fighting right now at a kill cliff. Robbie freaking Lawler, 21 wins, 1 by TKO, KO. Look at that shit. 21 wins, KO, TKO, 1 submission, 7 decision. The guy loves to brawl. 14-10 in his 2 stints with the UFC, 3-5 in Strikeforce, 2-0-1 in Elite XC, and 1-0 in the IFL. Again, was supposed to fight Santiago Ponzinibbio, which I do not think was a good matchup for him. I think Ponzinibbio still has a little bit of gas left in his tank. I think Ponzinibbio is levels above Robbie Lawler right now, and I think Robbie Lawler would have just been beat up in that one. Barberena, I mean, I thought that one would have been a little bit more evenly matched, and it was in the first round. Robbie Lawler faded quickly there in the second round and lost via standing TKO. He retired quite literally. I guess Nick Diaz is not literally retired yet, but retired Nick Diaz. And yeah, you look at towards the end of Robbie Lawler's career has not been good, but look at the fighters who he's faced in respect to him. Neil Magny, he may be a gatekeeper, but he's a top 10 gatekeeper in the division. Colby Covington, title contender. Ben Askren, he should have won that one. This was bull. This was absolute. I cost myself some more editing time there with all the beeps I had to throw in, but it's true. I hate that. I hate that. There's one more. I hate that. Rafael Dos Anjos, I know, who's a little long in the tooth now, but still has had some recent wars, some recent really good fights, and at that point was a title contender in his own right. Former title holder as well. Donald Cerrone, when Donald Cerrone was in his peak, a peak Tyron Woodley. I mean, look at this stuff. He got to win against Donald Cerrone, I should say. So, unbelievable. The 2 wars with Rory McDonald, number 2 in particular, inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame, beat Johnny Hendricks for the belt, defended it against Rory McDonald, Carlos Condit, and obviously lost to Tyron Woodley there. But, speaking of Matt Brown, OG fighters in that era, also got a win on Matt Brown as well. I mean, look at the murderer's row of fighters that he, take the win or loss out of it, that he was stepped into the cage with. Unbelievable, ladies and gentlemen. Unbelievable. Dismantled Josh Koscheck, memory serves me correct. And even in Strikeforce, when he wasn't at his peak, when he wasn't, I guess, and he's even said this as well and opened up to this, when he wasn't as serious, when he didn't have the right coaches, when everything wasn't clicking, he was still taking on absolute killers. You know, losing to Jake Shields, who's a title contender, Ronaldo Souza, Tim Kennedy. He beat Manhoof, though. That's pretty awesome. Anyways, absolute beauty. Look at some of the names on his resume, ladies and gentlemen. He lost to Jason Miller. Wow. Unbelievable stuff. And who can forget, you know, Nick Diaz and his first fight in the UFC. Stockton, mother. So part of many UFC storylines, history with the merger of Strikeforce and the UFC. He had a belt. A fight of his is in the Hall of Fame and is arguably one of the greatest fights of all time. I did say hot take. I think Matt Schnell and Sumida Jari's fight was more entertaining. Wasn't necessarily technically better. I will say no. Rory McDonald, Lawler 2 was one of the greatest fights of all time. I tip my cap. It's backwards. I got to do it backwards. To you, Robbie Lawler. Absolute beauty. Before we move on here, let's just take a quick look at Niko Price. 15-6 is Niko Price, 33 years of age. So yeah, a lot younger than Robbie Lawler. 10 KO, TKO, 3 submission, 2 decisions. 7-6-2 in the UFC. 8-0 in fight time promotions. Lost to Philip Rowe in his last fight. And again, he got pretty beat up in that one. And you can see a lot of time between his fights here. He's been beat up in his last few fights. A lot of miles on Niko Price here. But again, ultimately, I do not think it is the worst matchup for Robbie Lawler. Let me know your thoughts on this video, folks. Do you think Niko Price is the proper matchup for Robbie Lawler's last fight in the UFC? And my last question to you all as well, do you think this is it for Robbie Lawler in combat sports altogether? I personally at least see one bout in BKFC featuring Robbie Lawler. How do you like that? How do you like that?